is Dr. Christopher Burkett, Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the Ashbrook Scholars Program at Ashland University. Thank you for appearing on our political forum for the Election 20 telecast.
Pleasure to be here.
So what qualities do you believe our country needs in a president at this time?
I would say first and foremost, a president that will faithfully execute the laws and defend the Constitution of the United States, which is part of the oath that they take, and really the most fundamentally important thing that the framers of the Constitution expected the president to do. And secondly, I would say somebody who has the courage and the strength to deal with the hard issues in foreign policy, which has sort of been taken second stage to the domestic policy issues that have been dominating the election.
Right.
But there have been a lot of important foreign policy developments, and I think we need a president who will be vigilant and tough with regard to foreign policy issues.
Definitely. Do you think this election is one based on principles, policies, or personality?
Yeah, that's a great question. So elections can be one of those three or a combination of the three, and I think this election has been primarily an election of personalities, with the candidates talking about the character of the other person, and it's been lively and interesting. And then some policies, of course, have shown through at moments, but it hasn't quite risen to the level of a principled election. And by that I mean neither candidate has really taken much opportunity to talk about how their particular positions and how their vision of the future of the country fits within the framework of our constitutional principles. And I think that's a missed opportunity for both candidates and for both parties, to be honest.
Yeah. What key factors should the public be paying attention to tonight in the presidential race?
Yeah, so I would say first, in terms of the presidential outcome, I would watch two areas of the country in terms of the electoral vote. The Southeast, in particular, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And then in the upper Midwest, I would keep an eye on Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan. We'll see how the electoral vote turns out there. Those may be indications of shifting demographics and shifts in party preference in those regions. Secondly, I would say don't forget about the importance of congressional races. Presidential elections overshadow congressional races, but those are very important. The Republicans have a 6-seat majority, sort of tenuous majority in the Senate right now, and they're defending, I believe, 24 seats.
Wow.
And there are some very close races for the Senate, Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, and Alabama, among others. So that's something to keep an eye on tonight as well. And I would say third, and maybe most importantly, don't forget about your local issues and state elections, especially for governors, state legislatures, and judges. Those elections are probably most important for us as citizens because they affect us most directly and immediately.
Definitely. Could you describe the role of social media in political campaigns?
Sure, yeah. Of course, I'm going to go back to 2008 here a little bit, talk about how President Obama, or then candidate Obama, really revolutionized the use of the internet for campaigns. It was a very groundbreaking approach to drumming up support and organizing followers. And then, of course, Donald Trump took it to the next level with tweeting.
Right.
So we're starting to become accustomed to this. Social media can be a double-edged sword, though, when it comes to campaigns. On the one hand, it's a very inexpensive and efficient way to get your message out and to provide some organization for campaigns. But on the other side, it opens the door to a lot of misinformation, and it's often the Twitter sphere, so to speak, can get polluted with lots and lots of opinions, and it can be difficult to tell fact from fiction or opinion. And I also think that there's a tendency among some to follow people, especially on Twitter, who celebrities, for example, who don't necessarily live in the real world with the rest of us, and who don't really know that much about politics, and perhaps they take some influence from those sorts of people as well. So it has its pros and cons.
For sure. President Trump is spending less on TV ads and holding more live campaign rallies in Ohio, more than Vice President Biden. What are the motivations behind these two different campaign angles?
Yeah, great question. Well, for Vice President Biden, this is an approach that's been consistent with his safety with regard to COVID, right? So this is consistent with being safe.
Right.
Donald Trump has a very good reason to have been engaging in live rallies in Ohio. His base of supporters in Ohio tend to be the sorts of people that would actually prefer to show up for live events over online events. So he really needs to connect with and has needed to motivate his base in Ohio to get them to turn out.
Okay. Could you briefly explain Ohio's vote by mail or absentee voting?
Sure. Well, it's a very simple process. Voters had the opportunity first to register. That deadline was in early October, October 5th, and then they could request an absentee ballot that they could either mail in or drop off at their local county board of elections office. And that process was very simple. You could go to the Ohio Secretary of State page and just follow the links. You could even just Google "how do I vote in Ohio" and it would take you directly to the links.
Okay.
So,
how will this form of voting impact the 2020 election?
yeah, good question. We clearly have seen an increase in absentee and early voting. What I think that means is there will be more contested ballots, more ballots in need of verification, which means in some states we will probably not know the result in terms of the presidential election for days, if not weeks. And in terms of the overall election, if neither candidate wins a clear electoral majority, we may not know the outcome of the presidential election for weeks
Okay.
as a result of this. So we've been using absentee ballots and early voting for quite a while, but they just increased the chances that there are going to be contested ballots, and so it will require a longer process of verification.
Okay. What is one thing you wish all American people knew about politics and/or voting?
That's a great question. We're very lucky to have free and open elections in this country, and it's therefore sort of natural that during presidential elections especially, our passions get worked up, but I think we need to remember that no single presidential election can radically or permanently change the course of this country. Because in the end, we still have a constitution that represents the reasoned will of the people, as James Madison put it, and that still limits what government can do. And so there have been a number of hotly contested elections, some of which were nasty and ugly. You can go all the way back to the election of 1800, where Thomas Jefferson was elected. And what that proved was that we have a long tradition, I think, that we should be proud of in this country, of peaceful transfers of power from party to party.
Yes.
And I hope we keep that tradition alive. And at the end of the day, remember that people who disagree with us politically are not enemies. And that after this election is over, we go back to living our lives and maybe planning for the next election, at which there is always hope for change if you're not satisfied with the outcome of this election.
Right. So. Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much, Dr. Burkett, for joining me tonight.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Now let's go back to the Election 20 update set.